Good afternoon, it's Dr. Mike Talbot. It's 2 minutes to 12 on this fine afternoon, and we're getting ready to do our webinar on team facilitation. So it's your chance to get comfortable, set your volume, and get ready to hear from me about some aspects of how we work with teams to help with their effectiveness, resilience, confidence, and commitment. Well, good afternoon, everybody. This is Mike Talbot at UK Mediation, ready to talk to you this afternoon about aspects of team facilitation. Very nice to have you join us this afternoon. We've got a large number of people on this afternoon. We seem to be getting increasing numbers on these webinars, which is great, very gratifying. People from various parts of the world joining us today for the webinar. In the screen you'll see a chat box, a place where you can ask questions and make comments in the live chat. If you don't have access to live chat, you can email your questions to an email address which is webinar@ukmediation.net, and I've got colleagues standing by to take your questions that way. If you do have a live chat, it's great because you can talk to us as we go along. I will leave a bit of time at the end, but you can also have a dialogue with us as we go through this afternoon's webinar, which will be for about 40 minutes. I'll talk for about that length of time, and then there'll be a chance at the end for a few minutes to do for you to ask or comment anything that you like. So let's have a look at what we're going to do today. So a bit of an overview of this webinar for today. We're going to look at the facts and figures. We're going to look at some of the stats around dysfunctional groups, or what happens in teams when things go wrong. Then an overview of team facilitation, what it's about, what we mean by that. I often get asked what's the difference between mediation and facilitation, so I'll mention that as well when we get to that point. And then I've drawn out 3 team challenges, the kind of challenges that we have come across frequently amongst different sorts of teams. I want to draw out 3 of those and define what they are, and then talk about how we would address each challenge, so the kind of things that can go wrong in teams. Been quite a lot written about teams and about the sort of the stages of development of a team and so on and so forth. It's quite old theory, all that. I've wanted to bring things up to date a little bit, and also talk on the basis of our experience at UK Mediation, having worked with a lot of teams over a lot of years, talking about what those challenges are and how we would address each of them, and then get down to the nuts and bolts and talk about team facilitation, how it actually happens, how we structure our intervention. We've developed a 4-stage process here at UK Mediation over the years. I'm going to talk about what that is, and then a bit of time at the end, like I say, for questions and answers. So I do hope everybody's well able to hear us as we begin the content now on this afternoon's webinar on team facilitation. So first of all, it'd be rude to deprive you of some statistics, so here they are. So 3/4 of employers consider, according to Queen's University of Charlotte, that teamwork and collaboration are extremely important. So, you know, it's not an optional extra, it's not a luxury, it's extremely important that people within teams do collaborate, they do work along with colleagues, we pull in the same direction, there's a sense of everybody collaborating, not competing. So that's 3/4 of employers, according to Queen's University of Charlotte, and at the same time, well over 1/3 of employees believe that others in their organisation don't collaborate enough. It's in past tense. I looked into this. The statistics are from Visix. Looked into this. It was upon leaving an organisation. That's why it's past tense, didn't collaborate enough. So it's well over 1/3 believe that other people didn't collaborate enough. So that's disappointing if you consider that employers, over 3/4 of them, think it's extremely important, and more than 1/3 of employees think it's not happening. There's a bit of a mismatch there. So people will stay or possibly choose not to stay at their company, sometimes depending on the quality of working relationships. It can be down to all sorts of things to do with reward and the nature of the job, progression and so on and so forth. But in my experience, in our organisation's experience, a lot of people's satisfaction can be down to how well they get on with colleagues. And there's another statistic here which says that over half of employees believe a strong sense of community actually kept them at a company for longer than was in their best interest. So they actually compromised, according to this statistic from Gusto, their own career progression. They compromised interests to do with promotion, progression, pay, reward, because they enjoyed the strong sense of community. So when we're thinking about facilitation and other processes as being about engagement and employee retention, I think this statistic for me is probably the most significant one, to say that if people have that strong sense of community, a strong sense of being in a well-formed collaborative team, they'll actually stay at the company even longer than they consider would be in the interests of their career, their progression, or their reward. And a final statistic would be that a massive 86% of employers believe that a lack of collaboration negatively impacts the outcome of a project. So Salesforce this time have produced this statistic to say that the project will be compromised when the team doesn't collaborate sufficiently well. Somewhere between obvious and not so obvious, I guess, this one, but that is a very high statistic, 86%. So teams working well, it does actually impact the bottom line. So I think it's great for to think about employee retention. It's great to think about motivation. It's great to think about being able to attract people to a place of work. But actually, there's some figures here that say, you know what, it also impacts your bottom line. Okay, so there's some stats. The next thing I want to do is to get out my pens. Excuse me, I'm going to do a little bit of drawing for you, a little bit of cartooning. Not many people know I'm a very fast, highly skilled cartooner. So what I'm going to do is to draw on our skills, my pun for the afternoon. Just want to present to you a short piece about team facilitation, the need for it, how we go about it, and this leads into me talking about our 4-step process. Most of us who've ever worked in teams know that we work best when we're motivated and resilient and creative, but even the best functioning teams can suffer the odd dip or go off course. And I think this is where team facilitation comes in. So, maybe you need to improve how we work together, people pulling in the same direction, communicating, cooperating well, or I think sometimes what goes wrong in teams is that we need to remember how better to make decisions. And team facilitation can really look at doing that. Or perhaps it's about underlying conflict. We're trying to get the team to regain its skills and its motivation and courage so it can address that conflict. So 3 things there I think team facilitation can address. So it's tricky work. I just do myself a little self-portrait here. Hang on a second. There we go. Drawing as fast as I can. I tend to take charge of it myself. I've been doing this for about 20 years. I'm a psychotherapist and mediator. And I think for me, it's about getting the team back together, working well, making decisions, dealing with their conflict. What we do is to do some scoping, which I'll talk about in a second, really just saying, what's possible. Thinking about the objectives, really, second part of it. Third part is getting everybody together as a group, doing the work that we've got to do, and then following up. So, 4 stages that we use to our facilitation process. So I'm going to break down these stages a little bit further, but suffice to say that we want the teams to be engaged and productive and efficient. So this is why we offer these services. So there we go. Oh, I've just got to rest my pen hand now. That's hard drawing cartoons that fast. Just put that in a bucket of ice over here, I think, while I carry on. and talk about some of the challenges that teams face. So I want to draw out in particular three team challenges that in our experience seem to come up fairly frequently. Let's talk about what they are. So the first one really is there is underlying conflict. Now this one brings us the closest to the methods of mediation. We would approach teams in slightly different ways than when we're facilitating than when we're mediating. Some of the structure of the day, some of the structure of the interventions would be slightly different. But I think it's fair to say that when there is conflict in a team, an underlying conflict in the team, people don't necessarily want mediation. And I have been asked to go in, and our mediators have gone in, and facilitators have gone into organisations where they're saying, you know what, we don't want mediation, we just want the conversation started about some underlying conflict. So you know, we can address conflict with more facilitative techniques or more techniques to do with mediation, but it's quite consistent with the ideas of team facilitation that one of our challenges we would be trying to address would be about underlying conflict. The second one that I would want to address is when parties don't work well together. There's a sense of, there's not conflict as such, you know, it's nice and the atmosphere is okay, but people are not working well together. We're not pulling in the same direction, we're not there, we don't have a shared objective, we're not you know, actually assisting each other and collaborating to a sufficient degree. There's that sense really of a team that doesn't have conflict as such, but they're not working well together. And the third one I think that comes up quite often is about decisions are not being made well. There's a lack of decision making. I think it's a very common phenomenon that we come across in teams. You don't necessarily have conflict. There is a sense of people collaborating and pulling in the same direction, but hey, decisions are not being made or not being made well. So let's have a look at those three things and think about how facilitation might help. Look at the underlying conflict first. So I think the first thing is that people need to know how to address conflict. There's our own model of conflict resolution, our own model of mediation acknowledges some of the blocks that can get in the way of good dialogue. And for me, these are just as much in the air as in a facilitation as they would be in a mediation process. There is conflict there. People don't know what to do. I think one of the things that we need to do and support people to be able to do is to say the unsayable. A technique that we can sometimes use, I've variously called it going for a walk or walking around the block, is to, with somebody else in the team, actually pair up with them. We'll take 20 minutes for the exercise. I want you to go and have a walk around the block or down to the lake when I did one of these jobs in Finland once, and say to that person something that you've been avoiding saying. Say to them something that you feel would otherwise be unsayable. It won't be witnessed, it's private, we're not going to feed back in detail what these things are, but just have a walk, and that person is to respond, and if they too have something to say back to you, it's their opportunity to also say the unsayable. In the way that I've worked in psychotherapy, we call the things that get unsaid, we call those retroflections. It's about stuff that we will not say because we don't think it's polite or we don't think it's appropriate or we think it might hurt or offend the other party. And often the thing that can really unshift or unstick communication within a team is getting people to say those unsayable things. We clear the air. We might do that in a group or in small groups or in pairs, again, just to clear the air and to mention something about this team that is otherwise going unsaid. And ultimately, with the use of these techniques, with a robust facilitator and with the right sorts of boundaries, the right kind of setup, we can get close to rebuilding the dialogue. The second thing for me, apart from just addressing the skills, it's about finding the motivation to deal with what's happening. Thinking about the consequences of leaving this underlying conflict unaddressed. Quite often, we get asked to go in as facilitators a little bit too late, when team productivity has suffered, when the bottom line has started to be impacted, as we saw from those early stats. You know, that is a very common phenomenon, that when the team's not working well, the quality and the quantity and throughput of work are actually compromised. So there are consequences to leaving conflict unaddressed, and we can try and surface the motivation, better done in a group, this one, rather than with individuals or with pairs of people, to try and find that motivation to deal with what's actually happening in the group. And the third one with regard to conflict is summoning up the courage to sort things out. I use this term mobilizing because I think quite often people know there's conflict in a group, but they don't necessarily address it. They can see it's there, they can see the effect of it on them and on other people and on the group as a whole. And again, back to the stats, we can see the impact on the organization as a whole. but we're trying to help people to mobilise, take a deep breath, turn towards where the conflict is, summon up the courage to try and sort things out. So the three things there really is about skills, which is what you do, it's motivation, being inclined to do it, and it's about courage, which is actually doing it. So that's the first challenge, is about underlying conflict. The second challenge that I've identified there is about working well together. So even though there's no conflict, there can sometimes be a sense that people are not working that well together in a few ways. The first one is really it's about not communicating well. And this can be down to something as mundane as the use of language. It can be down to the fact that people are not listening to each other, or in the conversations they have, they're not turn-taking, or they're simply not making time for these conversations. We do some stuff on confident conversations as a part of our facilitation process. So we will actually coach people in how they can feel more confident in addressing difficult issues, how they can more readily listen to other people and empathise with their predicaments and let others know that you are actually taking their messages on board, how to take turns in a conversation, how to let the other person know you've actually got their, you've picked up what it is they're trying to say to you. And ultimately, as a structural or systemic thing, it's about making sure that the organisation gives teams time to actually have these conversations. One thing that springs to mind here is about within some organisations, they very much celebrate the sort of leisure time, Google headquarters, Apple headquarters. You know, there are table football machines, there are social areas, there are encouragements given for people not to sit at their desks, but actually to make time to have interactions and dialogues, either task-orientated or socially orientated dialogues with other people. It's recognised as an important aspect of getting teams communicating well together. And a second aspect of teams working well together is about cooperating well. So although they might be communicating, we don't have a great sense of one team. There needs to be, through a facilitation process, developing a place where there's no internal competition, but there is a sense of a collaborative atmosphere within the team, where everybody is pulling in the same direction. There's a greater sense of cooperation in the strictest sense of the word, where everybody's task time is spent in pursuit of the same objectives, and we don't have this internal competition or rivalry. So as well as communicating well, to get people working well together, we need to cooperate well, and more from the management or supervisory perspective as well, what we need is to be sure that things are being delegated well. And I make this little point here about fitting the task to the person and the person to the task. This is about making sure that people are doing the jobs that best suit them, and that the jobs are designed in such a way that they can best be achieved. So it's a thing from ergonomics. It's about fitting the task to the person and the person to the task, making sure that things are being delegated to the right person, and things that are actually being delegated and not being stored up. So the first team challenge that I identified was about where there's underlying conflict and what we can do about that. This second challenge is about how we can get people working well together in terms of communicating, cooperating and delegating well. And the third one is there even in teams where there's no underlying conflict and where you would say, yeah, they're working well together, but something seems not to be happening. Things are not progressing, we haven't got the throughput, we haven't got the quality and quantity of work that we need. And this is often attributable to a lack of decision making. So even in a team where there's little conflict, where there is good communication, the problem can be that people are not making decisions. Now some of this is down to a lack of priority setting. So decisions sometimes get avoided because we don't have a clear sense of priority. It sounds obvious, but it's as with most common sense, it's not that common. This can get missed. Discussing with the team and facilitating a discussion around it and doing some exercise with teams about what you need to do right now. Getting the priorities right. Only when we have the priorities right can we have some clear decision making. So what do we need to do right now? What can wait and what should we drop? What is it that we actually don't need to do, or it doesn't serve the organisation's needs for us to do within this team? So getting a better sense of priorities helps the process of better decision making. And secondly, it's about managing your discussion time. I've been into many organisations where there's not conflict, where you would say they do communicate well, but their discussions just go on and on and on. Sorry to those organisations, I think you know who I mean, but it's about having a clear objective to a discussion, having a clear objective for each meeting, and making sure you've got enough time, but not too much time, to actually have these discussions. So task-focused discussions, objective-focused discussions, but managing that discussion time better in the context of a clear set of priorities. And the third one really about this decision-making aspect of this, in terms of one of the 3 team challenges, it's about making sure that everybody's contribution is valued, making sure everybody gets equal time to speak and equal encouragement to listen, and being sure that everyone's opinion counts. Just back to the stats as well, we do know it's a very demotivating thing, and one that leads to disengagement, presenteeism and absenteeism. It's where people feel as if their voice is not being heard in a group or within a team. So this third challenge here about decision making is being sure that in the context of a clear set of priorities, we're using enough and not too much discussion time with a clear objective to discussions in a milieu when everybody's contribution is valued and valid. People get equal time to speak and are encouraged to listen, and everybody's opinion is given equal weight. So really that's a bit of the theory about 3 ways that I think we can get teams working better, all of which can be addressed through facilitative techniques, all of which can be addressed over a series of steps and stages, something that we've refined over the last 19.5 years or so. Just as a little aside, we're just thinking about our 20th birthday. We've got a 20th celebration coming up next May for UK Mediation. We started the company back in May '99. That's just round the corner. I find myself saying a number of things at the moment and thinking, oh, that's close to 20. But over that time, we've developed a sort of a process for doing team facilitation in the same way as we've developed our own mediation model. And this is something about how it happens. So team facilitation, they're the stats. There's some of the figures and some of the issues to do with the impact of having dysfunctional teams or teams that are not functioning optimally. And that's the impact. And what I've done is drawn out 3 challenges and talked about how we can address those 3 challenges, specifically about there being conflict, there being poor communication, or there being poor decision making. And these can happen in isolation, by the way, those challenges. It can be you got 1 of the 3 or 2 of the 3, or particularly dysfunctional teams have 3 of the 3. But in any case, here's what we do. Here's how team facilitation happens. And I'm going to go through some of the aspects of that about how we would use facilitative techniques to work with teams who may be experiencing some of those challenges. First thing is you need the right people. And I would just blow my trumpet briefly here and say that my team here at UK Mediation, I've put them together over the last many years, having prior to come into this working for 12 years myself as a psychotherapist and a consultant to organisations. I've driven UK Mediation along through 2 recessions. It sounds like I'm playing my violin this afternoon, but through 2 recessions, driven us as the market leaders really into this place where we're now training and mediating and facilitating groups. Been doing this for 20 years or so, and subject to some awkward circumstances like getting older, maybe we'll be doing it for another 20 years. However, there we go. That's me and my team. We need the right people to do it. We need the right process to make it happen. And here's something about that process. So I'm really just showing you a 4-step procedure, something that we've developed and drawn from best practice from elsewhere, to look at how we can make this facilitation happen so that we can address all of the stuff that I've been talking about in the first 15 minutes or so of this webinar. First thing is we need to head off in the right direction. With a scoping meeting, as was mentioned in the animation when I was drawing you some cartoons a few minutes ago. My hand's better now, I've taken it out of the bucket of ice, it's not too bad. So we're looking at the question of what's possible. How can we set an expectation? Let's talk about what could be achieved and how we are going to achieve it. Again, it sounds a bit mundane this, but this is a question that gets missed in my experience, and it's most important that we do this. When I float this question with directors or managers or shareholders even of organisations, and say, well, what is it possible to achieve here? Often they look at each other and say, well, we haven't thought about that question. So it's one of the first questions I would want to address. What's possible to achieve through the facilitation process, and how are we going to achieve it? And this scoping meeting is an extremely important part And I make it a condition of our organisation's involvement that we have that scoping meeting before we actually step over the threshold and start doing any of the work. The next thing is to point this next question really at the organisation and say, what are the team's objectives? We can do this either individually with the individual team members or with the team as a whole, and say, what are you for? You know, what are you here for? What are you actually trying to achieve? And define those objectives. So we're looking at scoping, which is the possibility or expectation of the intervention, but we're also talking to the team about, you know, what's your understanding of what you're here for? In the past, I mean, you can do it this way. I prefer to do it heads up, you know, talking and sort of having some dialogue about it. But what can happen is we do this confidentially in more difficult situations where there's a significant degree of conflict. We have actually done this confidentially through a questionnaire process, talking to people about, you know, what do you think is possible to achieve with this team? And also, what do you understand as your objective and the team's objective? But I think until we've got a sense of objective and know, you know, what it is that we're here for, it's very difficult to start the facilitation process. Then what I like to do, when we've done all that groundwork, and we can feel like we're in a very good place then to know what an expectation is and how we're going to achieve it, and also to know what people believe are their objectives. And it's surprising, you know, just how divergent the answers can be when you ask people about teams' objectives. You can get a very wide range of answers. But then we go on to hold a group session. We're talking about either a half day or a whole day or a couple of separate sessions where we get everybody together as a group. In very large groups, we've done this as some subgroups. It's just too much to manage. And I will go in with other facilitators as well. So I tend to lead this work myself, but I have a number of people that work with me who are excellent, brilliant facilitators. And we may go in with 2 or 3 of us, depending on the side of a group. Typically, we need a whole day, which I like to break up into different sort of chapters, if you like. Or sometimes we need to do some work, set some things in motion, and then come back again for another session. That's 3 of the 4 stages, and the last bit is about actually following up. So we hope that some changes happened as a result of our facilitation process, and we hope that through the group session of facilitating things around coinciding people's objectives, addressing the conflict, dealing with better communication, or looking at decision making, we hope that from that some change has happened. It usually does. I don't think there's a single case where I could say that change didn't happen. But what we like to do anyway is to follow up. We would typically do this after about 6 or 8 weeks, depending on the team and its circumstances. From safety critical areas where I've worked in facilitation, we actually followed up after a week, which is quite short. But the safety critical nature of the work required that we kept a very close eye and helped the organisation to keep a very close eye on restoring the function to that team. And what we actually did after going back after a week with that organisation, who was an aviation provider, is that we changed a few things after the week and sort of re-facilitated, if you like. So, as mentioned on the animation, you know, with teams, it might be about conflict, it might be about communication, it might be about decision making. I've talked about breaking down those 3 challenges and how we would go about addressing those challenges, and then we're looking at the nuts and bolts here about the 4-step process for scoping, agreeing objectives, holding a session, and then following up as part of the facilitative process that UK Mediation's developed over the years. And really, you know, we start with the end in mind. I think it's an important thing to use solution focus with this type of work. Think about what you're there to achieve. It's consistent with the team thinking about what it is there to achieve and what its objectives are. So the desired outcome really at the end of a facilitation process, thinking about where we came in and thinking about some of those stats that I've mentioned, you know, the desired outcome at the conclusion of this is that we're trying to produce teams that are engaged, where people are on task, where they're interested, they're committed, where they're productive, where the work is getting done on time and to the quality that's expected, and efficient. You know, there's a resource, teams are a resource, the people in a team are a resource, and the efficiency of that team does directly, as we've seen from the stats, impact the bottom line, and this is something that we're trying to achieve is a highly engaged, highly productive, highly efficient team. And I have seen many times over the last 20 years, and in almost every case we've addressed, where team facilitation can bring about this desired outcome. So that's a lot of what I want to say. I'm just wondering if there's any questions or comments that people would like to float. I imagine there are quite a few people on this afternoon, so there might be things that people want to say or ask at this point. So I'm just going to pause for a second just to see what sort of comments people are making. While I do that, just thinking about some of our events coming up. I'm going to mention in a moment some of our upcoming events. We'll do that after we've taken on a couple of questions. Thank you for your questions. They're coming in now. So here's a question we've received via email. And somebody says, what's the maximum team size for facilitation? Well, there's actually no limit. I have worked in some call centres where we're looking at very large teams. I think 38 was our record, where we've got a group together of that size. It required breaking it down into smaller groups. There were 3 facilitators involved in that one, and looking at doing some subgroup work, bringing that back to the group process. Got another question here from Tracy. Hi Tracy, how are you doing? Which says, just wondering how you deal with saboteurs. Well, for me, Tracy, I think the theory is that people sabotage processes because they have an unmet need, and if we don't know what that unmet need is, then we haven't given them a good listening to. So some of the preparatory work I would do before facilitation, I prefer to, if I can possibly, speak to people privately. And if somebody is, as you put it, sabotaging the process, it's because there's a need of theirs that's not been satisfied by the process. Either we've designed it wrong, or we haven't given them a good listening to, or we haven't taken sufficient account of that person's need. So it's an underlying principle that we work to here, which is about, conflict arises because of unmet needs, and needs drive behaviour. So when I see behaviours which are destructive, or as you put it there, sabotaging, I think we can attribute that back to the needs. So don't deal with the behaviours to start off with. Think about the needs, and then think about it's either a matter of skills or confidence or courage or motivation that means that person's need to be translated into more constructive behaviours. Nice question, Tracy. Thank you for that. Question of Bill. Is team facilitation needed because leadership is failing? Are essential management skills lacking? That's an interesting one, Bill. And I think one thing that can fall out of the facilitation process is, that there is a skills gap. It's a hard one for managers to own up to. It's something, again, that we try and use the boundaries of facilitation to help people to come clean about this. So it's something that they may want to speak to us about in private, or something that we might identify. But the very last part of the facilitation process, when we look at what's been achieved, we would often ask, what are the support needs of this team? Sometimes there's a need for emotional support, because people are in quite a bad place and working in some safety critical situations. There is a need for EAP type support, or counselling type support, or coaching type support for individuals, and that's been identified through the facilitation process rather than a priori. And I think the other thing that can be identified is a need to upskill managers. So I think the short answer to your question there, Bill, is that not so much team facilitation is needed because leadership's failing, but it could be a way to identify failures in leadership or gaps in essential management skills. But I don't know. I mean, I suppose in a way a great manager is a great facilitator. So I could answer that question 2 ways. I could be a therapist. I'm being so ambiguous. You could say that there's only a need for facilitation because it's not happening through the management hierarchy. It's a bit the same as I say about mediation. I think that managers with mediation skills can actually preclude the need for mediators with a capital M. And very skilled managers who are able to use some of the techniques of mediation mean that they never need to make a referral to their organisation's mediators or bring in external mediators. So I guess the same's true for facilitators, Bill. So a manager, if he or she has got some inherent level of facilitation skill, you probably wouldn't need to bring in external facilitators. And here's me talking myself out of business. Another question here by email. Is it ever too late to attempt team mediation? So this is more reference to team mediation than team facilitation. I sorry to say, but I think you can miss the boat. What we like is if there is a need to address conflict using more mediation techniques, going beyond what we could achieve with facilitation, I think there is an optimal time. It should be some weeks or months after the conflict incidents arrive, or after there are critical incidents within the team. And I think if it's any more than a few weeks or months, I think it's actually quite difficult, partly because we get very entrenched. We form these narratives about what's wrong. We develop narratives about other people in the team and about our own sort of rectitude and everybody else's failings. And I think they're very hard to shift, these narratives, once they've got very, very embedded, once we've spoken to people outside the team, once we've spoken to friends and relatives about what's going on, or even taken professional advice. People get so dug in, it's actually quite a tricky thing to shift. So, again, let me try for a short answer to this question about is it ever too late to attempt these processes? I think it can be. So I do try and be optimistic about this stuff, but I would say get in quickly. It was on one of the slides I mentioned that, you know, when to actually intervene is as soon as possible, as soon as you see there's some dysfunction in the team. Excellent questions. There are a few more which I could pick up after we finish this afternoon, but for now I did say we were going to go on for about 40 minutes. So just to say, a couple of plugs here. We've got a course coming up in Nottingham. There's a picture of our course. Oh, that's nice. Between 15th and 19th of October, just around the corner. I think we've got one place left on that, by the way, if anybody's thinking of training in mediation. Something that we've developed over the years, which is very, very popular, is also our mediation showcase. There's a picture of our last showcase. This one happened just last Friday. Now, how's about that? Up to the minute photography. We've got another one coming up on 30th November. This is where we show you what mediation looks like. It's a free event. You're very welcome to attend that, along with our free webinars. We do these free live events where we enact a mediation case, so you can really see for yourself what it looks like. You can get involved, you can ask questions, we invite people to chip in, so that you can really see the anatomy of a workplace mediation case, how it works, with a mediator actually doing it in front of you. Next one, 30th November, be great to see you there. That one's in Birmingham, central Birmingham. About 5 minutes walk from New Street Station. And we've also got a few webinars around the corner, so if you've enjoyed today's webinar, as I hope you have, you may like to come back again. Here's some of the topics coming up on our webinars. We've got one on mediating customer complaints, looking at how we can use the techniques of mediation, particularly to resolve entrenched complaints, and we'll be doing that on Friday 23rd of November. And then in a completely different direction, we've got a webinar on the use of mediation for preventing homelessness, working with families where there's a risk of family breakdown, and meeting the needs of the Homeless Reduction Act, which is a piece of legislation that came in earlier in 2018, looking at how we can open up the channels of communication so that nobody ends up either being required to or being asked to leave the family home. And then just to the side of Christmas, we've got one on becoming a workplace mediator. So a webinar on anybody who's right at the beginning of this journey, who's thinking of becoming a professional workplace mediator, how, not just how to train and what the mediation involves, but also some stuff about building your reputation, how to grow your experience, and how to establish credibility. So there's a few webinars coming up around the corner for your delectation. So if you've enjoyed being here today, perhaps you'd like to come back for one of those. In any case, it would be great to keep in touch with you. We would enjoy it if you would like and subscribe us on YouTube. If you do that straight away, that's great, because this, just while this is just happening. Twitter, you can follow us on Twitter. You can look at connecting to me on LinkedIn, Dr. Mike Talbot, or take a look at our Facebook presence. I'm sure you'll be excited about that as well. So it's been a pleasure to webinar to you this afternoon. We look forward to seeing you on some events another time. You can register for future webinars. There's a link there. If you go to our website, you'll find a link on there, or you can visit www.ukmediation.net/webinars. And similarly, you can sign up for the Birmingham Mediation Showcase. That's the next one round the corner. Numbers are limited at these because it's a physical thing. We have to have a limited number of people in the room, as it were. It's not like the webinars, which are unlimited. If you want to sign up for the showcase, you can do so at www.ukmediation.net/events. And that's me for this afternoon. I said 40 minutes. How have I done? 38 and a half. Not too bad. Do keep in touch with us. Thanks for joining us for today. And thanks for your continuing support for UK Mediation.